Rome wakes up before it looks awake. The stones are damp, the air tastes like smoke and bread, and the city moves like it already knows the schedule. Titus Aelius Primus, composite, a freedman who built a small stall into a living, ties the cord on his booth, checks the numbers on his wax tablet, and tells himself today is simple: show up, vote, go back to work. He walks toward the campus marshes with a flow of people, close enough to feel how it pulls. Sandals on stone. Low talk. The steady murmur of a crowd that doesn't need to agree to move together. Titus keeps his face neutral. Respectable men don't look lost. At the edge of the voting area, wooden fencing funnels bodies into lanes. Post-it notices hang where your eyes can't avoid them. Titus slows, and the first shock arrives, the list. Names carefully arranged, the kind of list that feels official even before you read it. He leans in. His eyes track line by line. And then the sharper shock, the pattern. The names aren't random. They're safe, familiar. The kind of men whose supporters are already organized, whose friends already know which lane to stand in, whose candidacies don't come with awkward questions. Titus isn't a political theorist. He runs a stall. He knows how markets work. This list reads like a market. Some goods are displayed at eye level, others are available, technically, but you have to ask. A man behind him murmurs, almost like advice. Those are the ones being recommended. Recommended. Not required. Not a law. Not a threat. Just a word that makes the air heavier. Titus closes his fingers around his voting token and feels his throat tighten. He thinks about the little chain his life hangs from, the supplier who extends credit when the docs run late, the neighbor who introduced him to a clerk who answers questions without contempt, the doorman who decides whether your name is worth carrying inside. Freedom is real, but so is dependence. He tries to picture himself voting wrong. He can do it. No guard will stop him. No one will drag him away. The cost would come later, in the soft places where punishment hides, in delays and lost paperwork, in a permit that becomes a month of tomorrow, in a contract that suddenly goes to someone else, in a smile that says, "You're not our kind of problem." Titus adjusts his cloak like it's just a practical movement. He looks again at the posted names, and something inside him goes cold with clarity. The choice isn't happening right now. The choice happened earlier, before sunrise, at doorways and private conversations. The vote is the public ending of a private process. Most historians think Augustus guided elections and careers through recommendation and influence while keeping the outward ritual of voting. Some scholars argue about how formalized the recommendation process was in different years, but the lived effect is hard to miss. The safe path is marked. The lane moves. Stopping would make Titus visible in the wrong way. He steps forward and votes. The stylus scratches. The act takes seconds. When it's done, he feels no pride, only the sensation of being managed by something that never touched him. He leaves the enclosure and lets the crowd peel away. He tells himself the line everyone repeats: stability matters. Peace matters. People remember the years of chaos, and chaos breaks shops and families. Titus believes that. He's grateful Rome feels less like a knife edge than it did in his father's stories. But gratitude doesn't erase the sour taste of that word, recommended, because it makes the whole day feel like a lesson. He stops and turns back. The posted boards. The fencing. The steady choreography of bodies. Men glance at the list and nod like they're confirming something they already knew. Others pretend they didn't look too closely. Nobody says coercion, because nothing looks like coercion. It looks like normal. That normal is the point. Under Augustus, power can be everywhere without being seen everywhere, because prestige makes people anticipate the center's preference. You don't need a soldier in front of you if you believe the important people already know which way you should step. And that's when the real question lands. If Augustus isn't standing here, if the emperor isn't physically present at the ballot, then where did the pressure come from? Who decided what safe means? Who made it risky to surprise the system? Titus starts walking back toward his stall. Then he changes direction. Not because he's brave, but because he's practical. In Rome, when you learn a truth like this, you don't shout about it. You go find the part of the city that turns truth into permission. You go find a door. As he skirts the forum, he sees clients waiting outside a wealthy house, standing the posture of men who want to be recognized and not remembered as trouble. Their faces are calm, but their eyes are counting favors. Titus watches for one long beat, and the voting board clicks into place. Rome has many stages, but the decisive one is often a threshold, not a ballot. He presses his wax tablet under his arm, sets his jaw, and heads toward the quieter street of heavier doors, where power doesn't shout. It just decides whether you get an answer. Titus turns off the main street into a quieter lane where the doors look heavier. Here, you don't raise your voice unless you want it remembered. The houses don't advertise power with banners. They advertise it with doorkeepers who decide whether your name is worth carrying inside. He stops at a doorway he knows because he has to. Titus is composite, but the routine is real. Clients show up early, stand straight, and hope the household remembers them as useful. After the voting board, he understands why this matters. Elections can be guided in public, but patronage guides life in private. If your business needs permission, The fastest path is rarely the law. It's a person. Titus raises his hand to knock, then pauses. Not because he expects a beating. Because he expects nothing. In Rome, being ignored is a verdict that doesn't need a judge. It means your request falls into silence. He knocks once, controlled, and steps back half a pace. He arranges his face the way the city taught him. Respectful, calm, not needy. His wax tablet is sealed. He keeps it close. He hears movement inside, then stillness, long enough for his mind to start bargaining. If this door won't open, which door will? Which neighbor knows which clerk? Rome runs on connections the way a lamp runs on oil. A voice answers from behind the wood. Short questions. Who are you? What do you do? Who sent you? Titus gives his name clearly, without bravado. He says what matters. He runs a stall, he pays, he delivers, he causes no trouble. He does not mention the voting board. Complaining is an accusation, and accusations are expensive. The door opens just enough to show a slice of shadow and the edge of an inner courtyard. Titus waits for the signal, then steps forward one pace, no more. He offers the sealed tablet like it's normal to hand your future to a stranger. His request is simple: permission to move his stall to a better spot, closer to foot traffic, where he could build steady income instead of surviving week by week. There's a pause, and then the answer arrives in the cleanest form of power. Leave it. Return later. We'll see. No insult. No threat. Just delay wrapped in politeness. Titus nods, because nodding is what you do when the gate isn't slammed, but it also isn't opened. He turns away and walks a few steps before the heat rises in his chest. Not rage, something colder. Because he can feel the rule underneath the softness, your request moves as fast as your backing. That's patronage, stripped of poetry. Not always bribery. Not always corruption. Often it's how a huge city filters trust. But the result is the same for Titus. Freedom comes with seams. Choices come with conditions. You are allowed to do many things, after someone important agrees you're safe to allow. On the way back, Titus passes a small shrine and thinks, briefly, about Augustus as the center that makes this whole world feel stable. Most historians think Augustus built authority by bundling old powers and adding prestige, so the system anticipates him even when he's nowhere near. Titus doesn't argue with that. He just lives inside it. The next morning, he goes where delay turns into policy, the administrative portico. It isn't grand like a temple. It's busy like a machine. Tables, scroll tubes, posted schedules, ink-stained fingers. Titus finds the line and waits, because waiting is part of the payment. When it's his turn, he offers his tablet. The clerk doesn't look at Titus first. He looks at the seal, then the marks, then the name attached to them. Titus watches the clerk's eyes and understands, with sick clarity, that this man can't command an army, and can still command Titus's weak. The clerk says a confirmation is missing. A witness line. A reference. Nothing illegal. Nothing impossible. Just one more step that separates the people who know the steps from the people who learn them by losing days. Titus asks what kind. The clerk answers without malice, like he's reading a shelf label. The system doesn't require emotions. And then the sentence drops, clean and final. Come back tomorrow. Tomorrow is Rome's favorite wall. It sounds harmless. It keeps power respectable. It pushes you away without saying no. Titus leaves the portico with his tablet still in his hand and the lesson settling into his bones. The vote was a ritual, but access is the reality. He doesn't go straight to bed. He goes to a neighbor's doorway, someone who once introduced him to a man who knows the office. Titus hates asking, but he hates stagnation more. He explains the missing line, keeping his voice low, as if the wall itself might report him for ambition. The neighbor hesitates. A witness is a small thing until it isn't. A witness ties your name to another man's risk. Titus waits, hands still, face calm, letting the silence do its work. Finally, the neighbor nods, and Titus feels a thin thread tighten into place, a name that can open the machine for the first time all week. By the time he reaches home, Titus has decided what comes next. He will borrow a name. He will secure a witness. He will return with what the machine wants, because in Rome, the machine doesn't bend to you. You learn to bend without breaking. At dawn, Titus is back at the administrative portico with a new witness line scratched neatly into his wax tablet. It's small, almost insulting in how small, but he holds it like armor. He finds the line without asking and stands where the shadows fall, because even waiting has rules here. When he reaches the table, the clerk takes the tablet and reads. The clerk's eyes move faster this time. Seal, marks, added name. Nothing about the clerk's face changes. No smile, no welcome, but the air changes anyway. Titus feels it in his shoulders. The system recognizes itself. A networked man is less risky than a lone man. The clerk sets the tablet into a stack. He doesn't treat it like Titus's future. He treats it like a task. That indifference is another lesson. Your life feels urgent, but the machine does not. Titus forces himself not to stare. Staring looks like desperation. Desperation looks like trouble. He steps back and waits for the next instruction. The clerk says casually that there will be a review, and that certain stall locations require additional clearance. Additional clearance. Another neat phrase that means somebody higher must be comfortable. Titus nods, because nodding is safer than asking, higher than you? He leaves the portico and walks toward his stall, but the city looks sharper now, like he's finally wearing the right lenses. He notices the little centers of control that used to blur into background, the posted schedules, the officials who redirect traffic, the inspectors who pause at stalls and ask about measures, the messenger who makes people step aside because he carries time-sensitive paper. None of it feels violent. That's the point. It feels administrative. Titus hears people talk about Augustus in the way people talk about a stable roof. Most historians think Augustus designed his rule to feel like the republic continuing. Offices, elections, Senate debates, while the real leverage shifted toward him through tribunician power, superior command in key provinces, and sheer prestige. Titus doesn't translate that into Latin titles. He translates it into a daily truth. If the center wants something, the edges eventually align. He sees it in who gets jobs. He sees it in who gets answered. He sees it in who can walk into an office without flinching. At the stall, Titus works through the morning as if nothing happened. But inside, he's mapping the city. He knows the Senate still meets. He knows courts still function. He knows elections still happen. Yet he's starting to understand the gap between exists and matters for you. The Senate can debate, but it can't make a clerk care about Titus. A magistrate can wear the right stripe on his toga, but the magistrate is not the one holding Titus's paperwork today. Around midday, Titus hears a rumor that a certain official has been reassigned. People say it in that casual tone that pretends it's gossip, not power. Titus stores it away. Reassignments decide which offices answer which people. Appointments decide whether an application becomes a week or a season. The system doesn't need to announce its choices. You feel them. He walks past an administrative courtyard and sees a man in equestrian dress speaking with confidence to an underling. Titus doesn't know the title. He doesn't need to. He recognizes the posture of someone whose authority comes from function, not ancestry. Rome under Augustus uses many such men, prefects, managers, administrators, because management is how a massive city stays steady. Titus's life isn't shaped only by senators. It's shaped by people who schedule, supervise, and implement. And then there are the people you don't see. The imperial household. Secretaries. Messengers. Gatekeepers who decide what gets read, what gets answered, what gets delayed. Titus can't point to them on a map, but he can feel them as absence, the missing reply, the delayed permission, the file that sits because nobody brought it forward. That night, Titus rehearses what he'll say if he's questioned again. He practices a tone that is respectful without being submissive, confident without being bold. In a city where words can be repeated without your consent, how you speak is part of your defense. The next morning, he returns to the portico. The clerk glances at the stack and tells him, "Not yet. Not yet is the cousin of tomorrow." It's the same wall with a different face. Titus feels the heat rise again, and he swallows it down. He asks, carefully, what else is needed? The clerk lists items as if reading a recipe. Titus writes them down on his tablet. Then he asks the question that matters most in Rome, and he phrases it like it's casual. Who should I speak to? The clerk pauses, just long enough to show that the question landed. Then he gives a name. Not a promise. Not a guarantee. A direction. Titus leaves with that name in his head like a key he isn't sure will fit. He doesn't feel victorious. He feels instructed. The system has taught him, again, that power isn't only the emperor's will. Power is the network of smaller wills that decide whether your day moves forward. And Titus, composite but recognizable, does what most Romans did when they wanted to survive under a stable center. He stops thinking in pure rights and starts thinking in routes. Routes through people. Because in Rome, patience is what you pay when you lack rank, always. A few days later, Rome reminds Titus why so many people swallow these small humiliations. Grain day arrives, and the city's mood shifts before the carts even roll in. Titus is not poor enough to starve, but he is close enough to feel prices like weather. One late shipment can turn a calm week into a nervous one. In Rome, food is politics, but it's also something simpler. It's the line between normal and panic. Titus walks past a distribution point on purpose, not because he needs the ration, but because he wants to read the city's face. He sees posted instructions, a control queue, officials placed where they can redirect movement with a gesture. The crowd is mostly implied. Voices off to the side, footsteps, the occasional argument cut short. The effect is clear. Rome is being managed. A man complains that he was skipped. An official doesn't threaten him. He points. The complainer looks at the line, looks at the official, then steps back into place. The weapon here isn't violence. The weapon is delay. Delay is the same thing Titus met at the clerk's table. Delay punishes without staining anyone's hands. Most historians think Augustus took special interest in the grain supply and the calm of the city, because a stable Rome is a legitimate Rome. The exact bureaucratic details evolve, and scholars disagree about how quickly some offices took their later form, but the direction is hard to miss. Specialized oversight grows, routines harden, and the city learns to expect bread as a scheduled promise. Titus watches the line move and feels a strange split inside himself. Part of him resents the system that made his stall conditional. Another part of him is grateful that the grain line doesn't turn into a fight. He remembers older stories, rumors of scarcity, riots that start over a loaf. Under Augustus, Rome tries to make calm predictable. He walks away and passes a public notice carved, order, tradition, the language of a city that wants to believe it is still itself. Augustus doesn't need to be present for this message to work. The city repeats it for him. That evening, Titus closes his stall later than usual. Dusk makes the streets feel narrower. He pulls his cloak tighter and watches how people move when the light fades. Rome is too big to be safe by accident. It has to be safe by organization. Titus hears footsteps behind him and tenses, then relaxes as he recognizes the rhythm of patrol. Not a legion. Not a battlefield force. Something more mundane. Watchmen moving with purpose, carrying lamps, checking corners, breaking the night into manageable pieces. In Augustus' period, Rome develops more organized responses to the city's practical threats: fire, theft, disorder. By 6 CE, the vigiles exist as a formal force. Titus may not know that date, but he can feel what it means. The night is no longer just darkness, it's managed time. He gets home and sits with his family. The meal is simple. The conversation is small. And yet, the day's lesson sits at the table with him. The same system that delays his paperwork also keeps the streets calmer and the bread steadier. That doesn't make it fair. It makes it tolerable. This is where acceptance is born, not an ideology, but an exchange. Augustus Rome offers stability, and stability has a price. The price is that power becomes ordinary, stitched into routines and permissions, so you stop noticing when you trade a little independence for a little predictability. Titus looks at his children and understands the bargain at its most personal level. If he pushes too hard against the grain of the system, he risks the fragile respectability he built. If he plays along, he can protect what matters. That calculation is not cowardice. It's survival in a world where rank is real. The next day, Titus hears another kind of news. Someone's case in a court moved quickly because a patron spoke for him. Someone else waited months because nobody did. Titus doesn't need to see the courtroom to understand the lesson. Courts exist. Laws exist. But access decides how fast they matter. He returns to the portico again, not with anger, but with discipline. He stands in line and watches a man ahead of him casually mention a name, an important name, like it's a common acquaintance. The clerk's hand moves faster. The stack shifts. Titus watches the machine sing for the connected. When Titus finally speaks, he keeps his words polite. He asks for the status of his request. The clerk says, still under review. Under review is another clean wall. It's tomorrow dressed in better clothes. Titus nods, then asks what he can do to help the review. That's the key phrase in an unequal system. Don't demand, offer. The clerk gives him another list. Small requirements, small confirmations, small delays. Titus writes them down and thanks him, because thanking is part of the performance that keeps the door from closing. As he steps away, Titus feels something settle. He sees the structure clearly now. Augustus is the center, yes, but the system's strength is that it has many hands. Grain officials, night watch, clerks, doormen, patrons, each one small, each one decisive in the right moment. This is how power becomes more than a man. It becomes a city habit. And habits are hard to fight, especially when they feed you. The name the clerk gave Titus leads him to a smaller office off a portico. Less crowded, quieter, the kind of place where decisions happen without spectacle. Titus arrives early. He stands where he won't block anyone. He keeps his tablet ready, his seal clean, his posture controlled. The most important thing he brings, though, is the right attitude, not demanding, not pleading, useful. When the official finally appears, it isn't a senator in a grand toga. It's a man who looks like function, tidy, efficient, the kind of authority that comes from being trusted to make the machine run. Titus bows his head slightly, not servile, just correct, and presents his request. The official reads quickly. Then he looks up and asks the question that always matters more than the paperwork. Who supports this? Titus answers with a witness name he borrowed, and he adds the smallest truth that is also a strategy. I've been reliable. I pay my fees. I don't cause trouble. He doesn't say, I voted the safe way. He doesn't need to. The official can hear that in his tone. The official nods, and Titus feels the world tilt by a fraction. Not approval, movement. The official says the stall can likely be relocated, but certain spaces are sensitive. Sensitive means crowded. Sensitive means visible. Sensitive means that when something goes wrong, someone above will ask who allowed it. Titus nods again. He has learned Rome's language. He asks what conditions he must meet. And this is the moment where the story becomes a mechanism. So Titus thinks it through, not like a lecturer, but like a man trying to survive with his dignity intact. Who has power in Rome right now? Augustus, yes, the princeps at the center with bundled authority and prestige. But not only Augustus. The Senate still meets, issues decrees, hears cases. Magistrates still exist. Courts still function. Yet in practice, a huge share of daily control sits with administrators and prefects, often equestrians, who supervise money, supply, order, and permission. And at the smallest level, clerks and gatekeepers control access and time, which can matter more than a speech. How do they enforce it? Most days, without drama. They enforce it with schedules, postings, permits, and the ability to delay. They enforce it with appointments that decide careers, and with paperwork that decides who is heard. They enforce it with services, grain oversight, patrols, fire response, because safety is legitimacy. If you keep the city calm, the city tolerates your hierarchy. What laws and rules matter? The bundled powers Augustus holds, the status rules that decide who counts, the court procedures that decide how cases move, and the social policies that reward approved behavior and make the wrong life more expensive. Scholars disagree about how aggressively some moral legislation was enforced in every corner. A few disagree that the intent was to shape elite behavior and broadcast a standard of normal. How does it hit everyday life? It hits in the same sentence Titus keeps hearing, "Come back tomorrow." It hits in who gets a faster hearing. It hits in who can secure a witness line without begging. It hits in the way your vote feels free until you remember you need a permit next week. Why do people accept inequality? Because after decades of remembered instability, predictable routine feels priceless. Because the system offers real benefits: bread, order, public works, a night that feels watched. People don't have to love hierarchy as an idea to accept it as a trade. Titus finishes the thought and realizes he's not thinking philosophy. He's thinking cost. The cost of moving against the grain. The cost of being labeled difficult. The cost of being forgotten. The official interrupts his inner map with another practical question. Do you understand the limits? Titus says yes. He does. Limits mean he can move, but he cannot act like the space belongs to him. Limits mean he can benefit, but he must remain grateful. Limits mean he must stay inside the lane that keeps the machine calm. The official tells him what to bring: a confirmation of fees, a specific measurement, a note verifying the location is acceptable. Each item is small. Together they are a fence. Titus writes them down, thanks the official, and steps back without turning too quickly, another small performance of respect. As he leaves, Titus feels a weird relief. Not because he loves being managed, but because the system finally became legible. He can navigate a maze if he can see the walls. What crushed him was pretending the walls weren't there. On the way out, he catches a glimpse of another layer, a secretary taking notes while a messenger waits, impatient but silent. No insignia of power, just the quiet confidence of people who control the flow of attention. Most historians argue the imperial household, secretaries, freedmen, advisors, became crucial gatekeepers, because the princeps can't read everything, but someone decides what reaches him and when. Titus doesn't need a throne room to understand that. He only needs to see which tablets rise to the top of a stack, and which ones sink without an answer. Outside, the city noise returns. Vendors, footsteps, distant shouting, the steady breath of Rome. Titus presses the tablet under his arm and walks toward his stall with one clear understanding. Augustus is the center, but the system is the touch. And the touch is what you feel in your life. A week later, Titus receives the result the way Rome delivers most results. Not as a triumph, but as a notification. A note, a seal, a set of conditions. His stall can move within limits. He reads it twice and exhales. On moving day, he arrives early, before the street fully wakes, and sets up with the care of a man laying bricks. He measures the space the way the official instructed. He keeps his goods within the boundary. The new spot is not luxury, but it is better. More foot traffic, steadier customers, less of the rough edge that scares away families. The first hour proves the point. People stop without being coaxed. Coins land in his palm faster. A customer he's wanted for months finally notices him. Titus smiles and keeps it modest. By noon, the relief is real, and that's when he understands the system's genius. It doesn't have to crush everyone. It only has to reward enough people often enough that hope keeps them inside the lanes. Titus didn't beat the system. He learned to speak its language. He found the right door, the right name, the right line on a tablet. And the machine, satisfied, let him move. He walks away for a moment and looks back at the stall like it belongs to someone else. He remembers the voting board, the word recommended, the way his hand tightened around a token. He remembers the doorkeeper's silence, the clerk's tomorrow, the official's conditions. None of it was dramatic. That's what makes it powerful. Routine is harder to fight than force. On a wall, a carved relief shows laurel and faces. The story Rome tells itself. Peace, tradition, continuity. Titus doesn't stop to admire it, but he feels it working. When the city repeats a message daily, it becomes part of what you call reality. Titus is composite, but his experience fits the period. Under Augustus, Rome keeps old forms, elections, magistracies, senate speeches, while the real leverage concentrates. Most historians think Augustus aimed to make his dominance feel compatible with tradition, so people could say the republic continues, even as careers and decisions flowed through a center of gravity. Some scholars debate the exact degree of popular choice left in various elections at different times, but few doubt that recommendations and informal pressure narrowed what choice meant in practice. For Titus, this isn't abstract. It's the texture of his day. He thinks about who holds power. Augustus, yes, at the top, with prestige that turns preference into policy. The Senate, yes, still a real institution, still able to matter, especially for elites. Administrators and prefects, yes, managing grain, order, and the practical functions that keep Rome livable. And then the people who never appear in statues. Clerks, secretaries, doorkeepers, messengers, keepers of time, keepers of access, the ones who can't write laws but can decide whether your paper moves this week or next season. He thinks about enforcement. Not usually a sword in the street. More often a schedule, a stamp, a delay. A comeback tomorrow that teaches you to align. A system that rewards calm obedience with predictable services. Bread, patrols, fire response. So obedience starts to feel like common sense. He thinks about why people accept it. Because Rome remembers instability. Because a steady city is a gift you can feel in your bones. Because most people don't wake up wanting to fight the structure of their world. They wake up wanting to feed their children, pay their rent, keep their roof intact. When stability is the offer, conformity becomes the price. And the price gets paid in small coins. A safer vote, a softer request, a quieter complaint. Titus returns to his stall and works the afternoon with a kind of clarity he didn't have before. He still makes jokes with customers. He still argues over prices. But now when he hears someone talk about the emperor, he doesn't imagine a single man controlling everything like a puppeteer. He imagines a network that anticipates what the center wants and moves itself into place. The emperor is the center. The system is the reach. The reach is what touches you. Near sunset, a young man, new to the neighborhood, too confident, not yet trained by delays, leans on the stall and asks, half joking, "So did your vote matter?" Titus pauses, then answers with the cleanest honesty he can manage. "Your vote matters," he says, "but it matters inside a web. If you want your life to move, you need access. You need someone who will say your name like it's normal." The young man laughs, unsure if it's a joke. Titus doesn't laugh. He isn't being cruel. He's giving a map. That night, Titus buys a writing tablet for his oldest child. Reading keeps you from being fooled by a posted notice. Writing keeps you from being erased when someone misplaces your file. He sits under lamplight and teaches letters patiently, because if power lives in paperwork, knowledge is a kind of shield. And here's the modern takeaway. If you want to understand who runs any complex system, don't only look for the person at the top. Look for the gatekeepers, the incentives, and the routines, the places where life becomes conditional. That's where power usually hides. If you want part 2 focused on one lever, elections, grain, courts, or patronage, tell me which one in the comments. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.